cry, you can borrow my mom.
Thanks, kid.
Don't cry, mister. You can borrow my mom, said the little girl to the Korean Mafia enforcer, sitting alone at the park on Christmas Eve. The snow fell heavy that evening, in thick, silent curtains that blanketed the city park like ash on burned ground. 6 days before Christmas, and the streets were drunk with celebration. Storefronts wrapped in gold ribbon, speakers pumping synthetic joy into the frozen air. But here, beside the old wooden bench where the Christmas tree stood lit and empty, everything was hollow. Kang Jae-sung sat motionless in his tailored black overcoat, his collar concealing the serpent tattoo that crawled up his neck. The leather of his gloves was expensive, but it did nothing against the cold that lived inside him. Beside him on the bench, a paper bag of roasted chestnuts sat unopened. A vendor had pressed it into his hands an hour ago, mistaking him for someone who still celebrated things. His eyes were red-rimmed, though no tears had fallen. They hadn't in 15 years. He had learned long ago. Tears were a luxury for people who still believed someone might wipe them away. If you love stories about broken men finding redemption through unexpected love, hit that like button right now and subscribe, because what happens in the next 20 minutes will absolutely wreck you. They called him the Ghost, though Kang Yi-jin had never once tried to be invisible. He collected debts the family couldn't officially claim, the ones that existed only in whispered conversations and coded ledgers. The kind of money that moved through shadows, changing hands in parking garages and abandoned warehouses. Always cash, always at night. When someone owed the Beck family something they couldn't publicly demand, they sent Kang. He never asked questions. He never left empty-handed. And he never ever left witnesses who could identify him afterward. The bench beneath him was rotting, the green paint peeling away like dead skin. Kang sat perfectly still, his long coat pooling around his legs, his hands resting on his knees. The playground was empty, except for the wind pushing a broken swing back and forth, its chains squeaking in a rhythm that might have been soothing if you didn't know what this place really was. Seoul's forgotten corner. The part of the city where broken things went to rust. He'd been sitting here for 45 minutes, waiting for Park Min-ho to show up. The man owed 300 million won, money he'd borrowed from the Beck family's underground lending operation, and then tried to disappear with. Stupid. Everyone who borrowed from the Becks learned eventually. You could run to Busan, to Jeju Island, to fucking Beijing if you wanted. It didn't matter. Kang would find you. And when he did, you paid, one way or another. But Kang wasn't thinking about Park Min-ho right now. He was thinking about the boy he used to be, the one who'd sat on this same bench 24 years ago, waiting for someone to choose him. The orphanage had been 2 blocks from here, a squat concrete building that smelled like mildew and boiled cabbage. Kang had arrived when he was 4 years old, though he couldn't remember his parents' faces anymore, so couldn't remember if they'd left him there because they were dead or because they simply didn't want him. The nuns never told him, and eventually he stopped asking. What difference did it make? Abandoned was abandoned. Every Saturday, families would come to the orphanage. Prospective parents. They'd walk through the common room while the children lined up like products on a shelf, smiling their brightest smiles, trying to look lovable. Kang never smiled. Even at 4 years old, he understood the game was rigged. The families wanted babies, or pretty girls, or boys who looked like they'd be grateful. Kang was none of those things. He was too old, too quiet, too angry. So every Saturday, after the families left with their chosen children, Kang would walk to this playground and sit on this bench. waiting. As if someone might still come back for him. They never did. The orphanage was brutal in ways that couldn't be explained to people who'd grown up in real homes. The older boys ruled through violence. If you were weak, you got beaten. If you cried, you got beaten worse. Kang learned fast. He learned to fight dirty, biting, clawing, going for the eyes when someone bigger tried to pin him down. He learned to sleep light, to hide food, to never show fear even when his ribs were cracked and his face was swollen. By the time he was 12, the other boys left him alone. By 14, they were afraid of him. At 16, a man named Choi had shown up at the orphanage gates. He wasn't there to adopt. He was there to recruit. The Baek family needed young men who had nothing to lose. Boys who wouldn't flinch when things got bloody, who wouldn't run crying to the police when the work turned dark. Choi had looked Kang up and down, taking in the scar above his left eyebrow, the way he stood with his weight balanced like a fighter, the absolute emptiness in his eyes. "You want out of here?" Choi had asked. Kang hadn't hesitated. Yes. That was all it took. One word, and his life changed. The Baek family became his family. The Mafia became his home. He learned how to break bones without killing, how to make people talk, how to collect debts from men twice his size. He learned that fear was a currency more valuable than money, and that reputation could do half your work for you if you built it right. By the time he was 25, he was the ghost. Untouchable, unstoppable, the man the family called when they needed something done that couldn't be undone. But on nights like this, when the collection was running late and the city felt too quiet, Kang came back here, to this bench, to this playground where no one had ever chosen him. He didn't know why. Maybe because it reminded him of what he'd been. Maybe because it reminded him that he'd survived when survival should have been impossible. Or maybe because some part of him, the 4-year-old boy who'd waited on this bench every Saturday, was still hoping someone would come back for him. They never did. The wind picked up, rattling the chains on the swing. Kang checked his watch. 48 minutes. Park Min-ho wasn't coming. He'd run, again. Kang stood, brushing imaginary dust from his coat. Fine. Running only made the hunt more interesting. And when he found Park, and he would find him, the man would pay his debt plus interest. The ghost always collected. Always. The December wind bit harder as they left the alley behind, Annabelle's hand tight around Diana's smaller one. They'd made it maybe 2 blocks when the black sedan pulled up alongside them, silent as a predator. Annabelle's heart stopped. The back window descended with a whisper of expensive machinery. Kang sat in the leather interior like he owned the entire street, which, given the neighborhood, he probably did. His face was illuminated by the dashboard's soft glow, making the snake tattoo on his neck seem alive, coiling with each breath. "The little singer," he said. His English carried the weight of someone who'd learned the language through violence and business deals. "She walks far in the cold." Every instinct Annabelle had developed during 12-hour shifts in the ER screamed at her to run. She'd stitched up enough victims to recognize the particular emptiness in a killer's eyes. Kang had that look, the one that said human life was just another commodity to be calculated and discarded. "We're fine," Annabelle said, pulling Diana closer. "Thank you." But Diana, with the fearless stupidity of childhood, yanked her hand free. "Mama, he's cold too. Look at him. No hat, no gloves. Just like us." "Diana, You told me sharing is important. Those brown eyes looked up at her, so achingly sincere. You said we help people who need it. Kang's expression shifted, something almost human flickering across his features before the mask slammed back down. He stepped out of the sedan, and Annabelle noticed how his men tensed, hands moving toward concealed weapons. But Kang just stood there, 6 feet of contained violence, staring at a 6-year-old girl like she'd spoken a language he'd forgotten existed. Your mother is wise, he said to Diana. Then to Annabelle. I interrupted something. The song. It's nothing, Annabelle started, but Diana was already bouncing on her toes. We were practicing for Christmas. Mama says singing brings good luck. Do you want to borrow my mama? She's really good at making people feel better. That's her job. The silence stretched like a blade. Kang's men exchanged glances. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. And Annabelle thought, this is how we die. Murdered because my daughter invited a gang lord to borrow her mother. Then Kang laughed. It wasn't much. Just a short, sharp sound that seemed to surprise him as much as everyone else. But it broke the tension like shattered glass. Borrow, he repeated, as if testing the word. He looked at Annabelle, and for just a moment she didn't see the snake tattoo or the dead eyes. She saw exhaustion, raw, bone-deep weariness that matched her own. I accept this borrowing, which was how, 15 minutes later, Annabelle found herself unlocking the back door of Mama Chen's diner with a crime lord and his security detail standing behind her in the alley. I work the night prep shift, she explained, flipping on lights. The fluorescents buzzed to life, revealing a cramped kitchen that smelled like ginger and sesame oil. Owner lets me bring Diana. She does homework in the corner booth. Kang's men moved to follow him inside, but he stopped them with a gesture. They melted back into the shadows, and Annabelle realized with a chill that they'd been there all along. Invisible until he dismissed them, the kitchen felt smaller with him in it. He sat at the prep counter while Diana chattered, pulling out her colored pencils and construction paper. Annabelle moved on autopilot, lighting the burner, pulling ingredients from the industrial fridge. Her hands only shook a little as she started the bulgogi soup, the recipe her grandmother had taught her back when the world made sense. My halmani said cooking is like singing, she heard herself say, mincing garlic with mechanical precision. You put your heart in it, and people taste the love. Kang said nothing, but he watched her hands move, measuring and stirring with the same focus she'd seen him use when counting money in that alley, like he was trying to memorize something he'd never learned. The soup simmered. Diana hummed while she drew, adding her off-key melody to the kitchen's rhythm. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tension began to drain from Kang's shoulders. Annabelle slid the bowl in front of him. Steam rose, carrying memories of her grandmother's kitchen in Seoul, of a time before medical school debt and divorce papers, and working 3 jobs to afford a 1-bedroom in the worst part of Queens. Kang lifted the spoon, tasted, went completely still. It's good? Diana asked, looking up from her drawing. He nodded once, something raw flickering across his face before he buried it. Then he ate like a man who'd forgotten what real food tasted like, not the expensive restaurant meals or the quick fuel between deals, but the kind of food made with someone's hands and heart. Mama! Diana bounced over with her construction paper. Can we teach Mr. Kang the Christmas song? Please? Diana, I don't think... Yes, Kang said quietly. Teach me. So Annabelle did, her voice soft and uncertain in the empty diner, while her daughter sang with fearless joy. And when Diana tried to translate the words into her broken Korean, mixing up syllables and making up sounds when she didn't know them, Kang laughed again. A real laugh this time. The apartment was small, but warm, filled with the kind of comfort that comes from making the most of very little. Kang sat on Annabelle's worn couch, feeling strangely out of place in his $1,000 coat, watching her move through the tiny kitchen with practiced efficiency. The space couldn't have been more than 500 square feet, but she'd made it a home. Soft throws draped over furniture, Christmas lights strung along the window, a small tree decorated with what looked like handmade ornaments. "I hope Instant is okay," Annabelle called over her shoulder, stirring 3 mugs of hot chocolate. "It's not the fancy stuff you're probably used to." "It's perfect," Kang said, and meant it. Diana was already curled up beside him, her small body radiating warmth against his side. She'd claimed the spot immediately after they'd arrived, as if she'd known him her whole life instead of a few hours. The trust unsettled him. Children in his world were taught to be careful, cautious. This little girl handed out her affection like free samples at the grocery store. "Here we go." Annabelle carried over a tray with 3 mismatched mugs, each topped with a mountain of marshmallows. She handed one to Diana, who accepted it with sleepy enthusiasm, then offered one to Kang. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and he felt that same electric current from earlier. She settled on Diana's other side, creating a cocoon of warmth around the child. "Home alone?" she asked, reaching for the remote. Diana nodded against Kang's arm, already half asleep despite the hot chocolate cradled in her hands. The movie started, and Kang found himself watching Annabelle more than the screen. She mouthed along with the dialogue, clearly having seen it dozens of times. When Kevin's mother realized she'd forgotten him, Annabelle's eyes glistened. When the burglars got hit with paint cans, she laughed so hard she had to cover her mouth to avoid waking Diana, who had indeed fallen asleep between them, her hot chocolate balanced precariously on the armrest. Kang carefully took the mug from the child's slack grip, setting it on the coffee table. Annabelle did the same, and they exchanged a smile over Diana's peaceful face. "She's out," Annabelle whispered. "That's her superpower. Falling asleep anywhere, anytime." "Wish I could do that," Kang murmured. "Too many thoughts keeping you awake?" "Something like that." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the movie playing on. Kang's gaze drifted around the apartment, taking in the details he'd missed before. A bookshelf crammed with worn paperbacks, a desk in the corner covered in papers, probably homework from her classes. And then his eyes landed on a photograph in a simple frame on the side table. His breath caught. A woman, clearly Annabelle's grandmother based on the resemblance, stood in front of a house. Not just any house. A traditional hanok, with its distinctive curved roof and wooden beams, but it was the specific house that made Kang's blood run cold. He knew that courtyard, knew the stone path visible in the background, knew the persimmon tree that would be just out of frame to the left. He'd walked past that house 100 times as a child. It was 3 blocks from where he'd grown up, in one of Seoul's old neighborhoods that had somehow survived the city's rapid modernization. "That's my halmoni," Annabelle said softly, noticing his stare. "My grandmother. The picture was taken about 30 years ago, before she..." She trailed off, a shadow crossing her face. Kang couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The coincidence was impossible. Seoul was a city of 10 million people. The odds of this connection. "You're from Seoul?" Annabelle asked quietly, reading something in his expression. He managed a nod, his throat tight. Her voice dropped even lower, as if afraid to disturb more than just the sleeping child between them. Me too, until I wasn't. 4 words. 4 words that contained everything. Displacement, loss, becoming something other than what you started as. He heard his own story in her voice, saw his own grief reflected in her eyes. When? He asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. I was 8 when we left. My grandmother brought me to America after my parents... She stopped, shook her head. Long story. Sad story. Not a Christmas Eve story. Kang looked at the photograph again. At the house he knew. At the woman who'd stood in front of it, who'd somehow ended up raising a granddaughter an ocean away from home. At the impossible thread connecting his past to this present moment. I know that house, he said finally. Annabelle's head turned sharply toward him. What? The house in the photograph. I know it. I lived 3 blocks away. He met her eyes. What neighborhood? She told him, and the room seemed to tilt sideways. They'd been neighbors. In another life, in another world, they'd probably passed each other on the street. Maybe their grandmothers had known each other, had bought vegetables at the same market, had shared the same complaints about the changing city. Small world, Annabelle whispered, but her eyes said she understood it was more than that. Some connections defied logic, defied probability. Between them, Diana slept on, dreaming whatever dreams come to children on Christmas Eve, unaware that the 2 adults who bracketed her warmth had just discovered they were bound by more than chance. Annabelle's hands trembled as she pulled the dusty photo album from the bottom shelf of her grandmother's old bookcase. The leather binding was cracked, the pages yellowed and brittle. She hadn't looked through these in years, couldn't bear to after her grandmother passed. But something Kang had said earlier gnawed at her memory like a splinter working its way to the surface. What are you doing? Kang's voice came from the doorway, guarded but curious. She didn't answer. Her fingers moved frantically through the pages, past birthday parties and Christmas mornings, past her own gap-toothed smiles and grandmother's warm eyes. Then she stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. The photograph was blurry, slightly out of focus, the kind of casual snapshot taken without thought. The date stamp in the corner read August 2003. But it wasn't the quality that made Annabelle's heart pound. It was the subject. A thin Korean boy stood in her grandmother's doorway, barely visible in the frame's edge. He couldn't have been more than 12 or 13, all sharp angles and hollow cheeks. In his small hands, he clutched a wooden carving, crude but careful, the work of someone who'd spent hours with nothing but time and a pocket knife. His eyes stared directly at the camera, dark and haunted even in that frozen moment. Oh my God. The words escaped Annabelle's lips as a whisper. Kang moved closer, his footsteps deliberate across the hardwood floor. When he saw what she was looking at, he went absolutely still. That's you, Annabelle said, her voice breaking. That's you standing in my grandmother's doorway. The silence that followed felt like the air before lightning strikes. Kang took the album from her hands with a gentleness that contradicted everything about him. His fingers traced the edge of the photograph, and for the first time since she'd met him, Annabelle saw something crack in his carefully maintained armor. Mrs. Chen, he said finally, the name coming out like a prayer. Your grandmother was Mrs. Chen. You lived next door. The pieces were falling into place now, memories Annabelle had been too young to fully understand at the time. That summer when I visited, there was a boy. She kept making extra food, said she had a young friend who needed looking after. Kang nodded slowly, still staring at the photograph. 3 months. I lived there for 3 months with a foster family that took state checks and spent them on liquor. His jaw tightened. Your grandmother was the only adult who fed me, who didn't flinch when I showed up with bruises, who acted like I was worth something. Annabelle's throat constricted. She remembered now, vague impressions of her grandmother's concern, hushed phone calls, the way she'd pack extra portions of dinner into containers. She'd been only 7 that summer, more interested in her dolls than the thin boy who sometimes appeared at the back door. She tried to foster you formally, Annabelle said, the memory suddenly crystal clear. I remember her filling out paperwork at the kitchen table. She was so determined. She died before it went through. Kang's voice was flat, emotionless, but his knuckles had gone white around the album's edge. Heart attack, October 15th, 2003. I was sent back to the group home the next day. 3 weeks later, I was transferred to another facility upstate, and 6 months after that, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Annabelle understood perfectly what came next. The trajectory of a damaged kid with no one to catch him when he fell. The Mafia didn't recruit success stories. They preyed on the forgotten, the angry, the ones who'd learned that the world had no safety net. She talked about you, Annabelle said softly. Before she died, when I was older. She said she'd failed a boy who needed her, that she'd tried to save one more child but ran out of time. I never knew who she meant. Kang set the album down carefully on the coffee table, his movements controlled but his hands still shaking. When he looked at Annabelle, his eyes held a devastation so complete it made her chest ache. She saved me anyway, he said, his voice barely audible. Those 3 months, the way she looked at me like I mattered, that's the only reason I didn't put a bullet in my own head at 16. It's the only good memory I have from before everything went dark. Annabelle stood frozen, understanding blooming like poison in her veins. The man who'd bought her. The monster in Italian suits who'd stolen her life. He'd once been the scared boy her grandmother tried to save. The same grandmother who'd taught Annabelle that every person deserved kindness, that everyone carried invisible wounds that demanded compassion. The cruelty of it was almost poetic, almost unbearable. She would have loved you, Annabelle whispered, if she'd had more time. Kang's face hardened again, the vulnerability disappearing behind familiar walls. But she didn't. The coffee shop was a small place tucked between a bookstore and a florist, the kind of neighborhood spot where regulars knew each other's orders. Kang arrived first, choosing a corner table away from the windows. He ordered black coffee he wouldn't drink, and checked his watch 3 times before Annabelle walked through the door. She looked different in daylight, softer somehow. The hard edge she'd worn at the hospital had smoothed into something closer to exhaustion. When she sat down across from him, neither of them spoke immediately. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither was sure could hold their weight. "Thank you for meeting me," Annabelle finally said. She wrapped her hands around the latte the barista had brought, though the shop was warm. "I wasn't sure you would." Kang nodded once. He'd almost canceled twice that morning, but something about the way Deanna had looked at Annabelle, the recognition in her eyes that went deeper than logic, had kept him from sending the text. "I need to understand what happened. The real story." "I don't know all of it." Annabelle's voice was quiet. "My mother didn't talk about the past much. But there are things I know. Things she told me before she died." The mention of death made something tighten in Kang's chest. He reached into his jacket pocket, his fingers finding the familiar shape they'd sought 1,000 times over 2 decades. When he pulled out the small wooden tiger, barely 3 inches long, Worn smooth from years of handling, Annabelle's intake of breath was sharp enough to cut. "Where did you get that?" Her hand moved toward it, stopped halfway. Kang set it on the table between them. In the coffee shop's warm light, the tiger's features were barely visible anymore, loved nearly into abstraction. "Your grandmother gave it to me. The last time I saw her." Annabelle's fingers finally touched it, tracing the curve of the tiger's back. "She made these," she whispered. "When I was little, there were dozens of them. Different animals. She'd carve them at night, sitting by the window." She looked up at Kang. "She stopped after I turned 10. I asked her why once. She said she'd made all the tigers she needed to make." Kang's throat felt tight. "She told me tigers always find their way home. I never understood what she meant. She was talking about you." Annabelle's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "She called you her lost tiger. I didn't know what it meant until I was older, until she finally told me about the boy she'd helped raise, the one who disappeared into the system after." She stopped, swallowed hard. "She tried to find you, did you know that?" The coffee shop sounds, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of other conversations, the clatter of cups, all seemed to fade into a distant hum. Kang stared at the wooden tiger, at Annabelle's hand still resting on it, and felt something inside him crack. "She tried?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. "For years. She hired people. She called agencies. She showed up at offices until they threatened to call the police." Annabelle pulled her hand back, wiped at her eyes. "She had these files, boxes of them, letters she'd written to addresses that no longer existed, forms she'd filled out, dead ends, all of them. The system had swallowed you completely." Kang picked up the tiger again, rolled it between his palms. He'd carried it through 3 foster homes, through years of group housing, through nights when he'd been so angry he'd almost thrown it away. He'd carried it through police academy, through his wedding day, through the birth of his daughter. "I thought she'd forgotten me." "She never forgot you." Annabelle's voice broke. "When she was dying, she asked me to keep looking. She made me promise. She said you were out there somewhere, and you'd need to know that someone had wanted you to, that someone had loved you." The carefully constructed walls Kang had built over 20 years, the ones that kept him professional, detached, safe, began crumbling. He felt them going, felt the foundations shaking, and couldn't stop it. "I didn't know. How could you?" Annabelle reached across the table, her hand hovering near his. "You were a child. You thought you'd been abandoned, but you weren't. You were stolen." Kang looked up at her. "Stolen? From everyone who loved you. From my grandmother. From the life you should have had." Annabelle's jaw tightened. "And now history's trying to repeat itself with Diana. But we're not going to let it. Not this time." The tiger was warm in Kang's palm, worn smooth by years of grief and longing and unanswered questions. Outside the coffee shop window, spring rain had started to fall, soft and persistent. And for the first time in 20 years, Kang let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, tigers really could find their way home. The coffee had gone cold in Annabelle's hands. She'd been holding the same cup for 20 minutes, staring at nothing, and Kang had been watching her the entire time from across the kitchen island. "You going to drink that or just strangle it?" he asked. She blinked, looked down at her white knuckles, set the cup down carefully. "Sorry, I was just thinking about whatever's been eating at you for the past week." Her head snapped up. "How did you—" "You check the locks 3 times before bed now. You watch the windows. And yesterday when that delivery guy knocked, you damn near jumped out of your skin." Kang leaned forward, elbows on the counter. So you want to tell me what's going on? Or you want me to keep listing observations until you crack? Annabelle's laugh came out shaky. God, you're relentless. I'm thorough. There's a difference. His eyes hadn't left her face. Talk to me. She pulled her cardigan tighter, though the kitchen wasn't cold. Started twice, stopped. Finally, just said it. 6 weeks ago, I testified in a case, domestic violence. The wife came into the ER with 3 broken ribs and a fractured orbital socket. Said she fell down the stairs. Annabelle's jaw tightened. I documented everything. The defensive wounds on her forearms, the pattern of bruising that doesn't match a fall. When the DA's office contacted me, I didn't hesitate. Kang's expression hadn't changed, but something in the air shifted. Colder. Sharper. The husband walked on a technicality, Annabelle continued. Something about evidence handling. And now, she pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, showed him the call log. Unknown number. Over and over. It started 2 weeks ago. No one speaks when I answer, just breathing. Sometimes traffic sounds in the background. Police? Filed a report. They said there's nothing they can do. No threats. No proof it's even him. Her voice cracked slightly. But I know it's him, Kang. I feel it. There's more, Kang said. It wasn't a question. Annabelle nodded. Last Thursday, Diana's school called. There was a man in a gray sedan parked across the street during dismissal. Sat there for 40 minutes, just watching the kids come out. When the principal approached, he drove away. She said it might be nothing, but your gut says different. My gut says he's trying to scare me. Show me he knows where my daughter is, where we live, that he can get to us anytime he wants. Annabelle's hands were shaking now. The police said they'd increase patrols in the area, that I should document everything and call if anything escalates. But what does escalation look like, Kang? Do I wait until he actually does something? Until Diana... Stop. One word. Quiet. Absolute. That's not going to happen. Annabelle looked at him. Really looked. His posture hadn't changed, still casual, still relaxed. But his eyes had gone somewhere else entirely. Somewhere dark and certain. Tell me everything, Kang said. His name, what he looks like, where he works, every detail you remember. Why? What are you going to... Everything, Annabelle. So she told him. About Richard Kellerman, 42, electrician's license, last known address in Red Hook, about the way he'd stared at her in the courtroom with dead eyes and a thin smile. About the text his wife had sent 2 days ago. I'm sorry. He knows it was you. Please be careful. Kang absorbed it all without interrupting. When she finished, he pulled out his phone, typed something, put it away. What did you just do? Annabelle asked. Made some calls. Kang, you work the next 2 days? He asked, as if she hadn't spoken. Yes, but good. I need 48 hours. He stood, carried his coffee cup to the sink. Don't answer calls from unknown numbers. Vary your route to work. I'm assigning someone to watch Diana's school. You're assigning? What does that even mean? Annabelle stood too, anger cutting through her fear. Who are you, Kang? Really? He looked at her for a long moment. Someone who fixes problems. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting right now. He moved toward the door, then stopped, turned. You did the right thing, testifying. Don't ever doubt that. Some men think fear is control. They're wrong. And what do you think control is? Kang's smile didn't reach his eyes. Certainty. He was gone before she could respond. 48 hours later, the phone calls stopped. The man in the gray sedan never reappeared, When Annabelle carefully asked what happened, Kang simply said, "He decided to relocate. Utah, I think. Fresh start." People don't just relocate because someone asks nicely. No, Kang agreed. They don't. She should have pressed, should have demanded answers. Instead, she watched him help Diana with her science project that evening. His hands patient and sure as he showed her how to build a circuit board, and chose, consciously, deliberately, not to ask the questions that would shatter whatever complicated thing was growing between them. Some doors, once opened, couldn't be closed again, and Annabelle wasn't ready to look through this one yet. Kang had known the summons would come eventually. The black car. The silent driver. The elevator ride to the penthouse office where Chairman Yoon conducted business that never appeared in any corporate filing. He'd been careless, and in their world, carelessness had consequences. The office overlooked the city like a predator, surveying its hunting grounds. Yoon stood at the window, his reflection ghostly in the darkened glass. He didn't turn when Kang entered. "Sit." Kang remained standing. Old habits. Never put yourself in a position you can't fight your way out of. Yoon's laugh was dry as dead leaves. Still the soldier. That's what I've always appreciated about you, Kang-si. Your discipline. He finally turned, and his eyes were empty of warmth. Which is why your recent behavior has been so disappointing. I've completed every assignment. Yes, completed. But not with your usual efficiency. Yoon moved to his desk, fingers trailing along its polished surface. You used to be hungry. Precise. Now you're distracted. Soft. He opened a folder, though Kang suspected he'd memorized every detail. I heard about a woman, a child. The words hung in the air like a blade. Kang's face remained impassive, but something cold slithered down his spine. Sources say you've been seen at a school, a park, playing the domestic role. Yoon's smile was a surgical cut. How quaint. Kang said nothing. Denial would be an insult to both their intelligences. I don't care what you do in your personal time, Yoon continued, his tone suggesting the opposite. But when your hobbies interfere with business, they become my concern. The Park Enterprises situation should have been resolved 2 weeks ago. Instead, you've been running surveillance, gathering intelligence, looking for alternatives. He closed the folder with a decisive snap. There are no alternatives. There is only the job. Park's security is heavier than anticipated. I was being thorough. You were being sentimental. Yoon leaned against his desk, casual as a cobra. Let me be clear. You have 48 hours to finish the Park Enterprises job. Break the CEO's hands as promised to our client. Retrieve the documents from his private safe. Standard work. The kind you used to do without hesitation. Kang's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Or, Yoon continued, savoring the word, I'll send someone else, someone less conflicted. And while they're handling Park, I'll have them stop by that apartment building on Maple Street. 3rd floor, Unit C. Just to remind you where your loyalties lie. He paused, letting the threat crystallize. Through the people you've been playing house with. The room seemed to contract. Every instinct Kang had honed over 15 years screamed at him to move, to act, to eliminate the threat. But Yoon had 4 men outside that door, and violence now would only accelerate the danger to Min Jun and Ji Woo. That won't be necessary, Kang said, his voice level. I'll handle Park. I know you will. Yoon returned to the window, dismissing him with his back. 48 hours. And Kang, after this, Perhaps a reassignment, somewhere far from your new friends. Distance provides clarity. Kang left without another word, his mind already working through the geometry of the trap. Yoon had him cornered. Do the job and remain the monster Minjun feared, or refuse and watch everything burn. There was no third option. Except there was. He'd been ignoring the business card in his wallet for 3 years. Special Agent Rebecca Torres, FBI. She'd approached him after the warehouse incident in Oakland, offering immunity, witness protection, a chance to do the right thing. He'd laughed in her face. The idea of betraying Yoon, of trusting the government, had seemed absurd. But that was before a 7-year-old boy had looked at him with something other than fear. Before a woman had chosen to see him as human rather than weapon. That night, Kang sat in his car 3 blocks from his apartment, staring at his phone. The burner he used for clean work, untraceable. Around him, the city hummed with ordinary life, people heading home to families, to safety, to futures that didn't involve blood and broken bones. He thought about Minjun's drawing, still tucked in his jacket, the 3 stick figures holding hands. He thought about Yoon's cold smile and the implicit promise, I will destroy everything you care about. He thought about Park, the CEO who'd probably earned his fate through his own sins, but whose broken hands would confirm exactly what Minjun feared Kang was. Special Agent Torres answered on the 2nd ring. This is a surprise. You said the offer still stands. Kang's voice was quiet. 3 years later. A pause. Professional excitement carefully leashed. It does. Then we need to talk, tonight. I'll give you Yoon, his entire operation, but I need something in return. His grip tightened on the phone. Protection. Not for me. For 2 people who don't even know they need it. That can be arranged. Where? Kang gave her the location. Neutral ground, public enough to prevent betrayal from either side. After he hung up, he sat in the darkness for a long moment, understanding with perfect clarity that he'd just crossed a line he could never uncross. By morning, he would either be a federal informant or a dead man. But Minjun would be safe. And sometimes, that was the only choice that mattered. Kang stood in the empty office building, staring at the briefcase full of documents he'd just secured. The job had been almost too easy. A simple retrieval, no complications, no witnesses. But something felt wrong. The silence pressed against his eardrums like water, and his instincts screamed in a language he'd learned to trust years ago. His phone vibrated. Annabelle's name flashed on the screen. He answered before the 2nd ring. What? They took her! Annabelle's voice shattered through the speaker, raw and broken. Kang, they took Diana. I went to pick her up from school and she wasn't there. The teacher said 2 men came with a note. They said they were family. Oh God, Kang, I'm so sorry. I should have... The briefcase hit the floor. His vision narrowed to a single point of red-hot clarity. When? His voice came out flat, dead. 20 minutes ago. Maybe 30. I tried calling you, but... Where's Yoon? I don't know, A text message cut through the call. Unknown number. A photo of Diana sitting on a concrete floor, eyes wide with fear, a newspaper in her hands showing today's date. Below it, Warehouse 7, Pier 23. Come alone, or she disappears forever. Kang didn't remember hanging up, didn't remember leaving the building or getting to his car. The world became a series of snapshots, streetlights blurring past, red lights he ran without slowing, the speedometer climbing past numbers that stopped meaning anything. They'd crossed a line that didn't exist in his world. A line he'd never thought anyone would be stupid enough to cross. Diana's face flashed through his mind. Her gap-toothed smile when she'd shown him her math test. The way she'd grabbed his hand in the grocery store without thinking. How she'd fallen asleep on his shoulder during the movie. 7 years old. She still believed in monsters under the bed and heroes in capes. She didn't know the real monsters wore expensive suits and smiled when they hurt you. The warehouse district materialized through sheets of rain. Pier 23 sat at the end of a crumbling access road, surrounded by abandoned buildings and rusted shipping containers. Kang parked 3 blocks away and moved through the darkness like smoke, his footsteps silent on wet pavement. 4 guards outside the main entrance, 2 on the north loading dock, another 3 patrolling the perimeter. Kang counted them all, mapped their positions, timed their rotations, 15 seconds between each circuit, 30-second blind spot on the eastern wall. He didn't need longer than that. The first guard died without making a sound. Kang caught him from behind, one hand over his mouth, the other breaking his neck with a practiced twist. He lowered the body behind a dumpster and kept moving. The second guard was reaching for his radio when Kang's blade found his throat. The third managed to draw his gun, but the bullet went wide, sparking off metal as Kang closed the distance and drove his knife under the man's ribs. They'd taken his daughter. They'd put their hands on a 7-year-old girl. There would be no mercy tonight. Kang moved through the warehouse like death itself, systematic and unstoppable. Guards fell before they could scream. Bones broke. Blood pooled on concrete. He didn't feel the cuts on his arms or the burning in his lungs. He felt nothing but the cold, focused rage that had made him legendary in a world where legends were written in corpses. The main office sat at the back of the warehouse, light spilling under the door. Kang kicked it open. Yoon looked up from his desk, face paling. Kang, wait. Where is she? Listen, this doesn't have to... Kang's gun cleared leather faster than thought. The bullet took Yoon in the shoulder, spinning him out of his chair. I won't ask again. Freezer! Yoon gasped, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Cold storage room, 2nd floor, she's fine, I swear. Kang was already moving. He took the stairs 3 at a time, following the sound of muffled crying. The cold storage room sat at the end of a hallway, its metal door locked from the outside. He shot off the padlock and yanked the door open. Diana sat in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees, shivering in her school uniform. Her face was red from crying, but when she saw him, her eyes went wide with relief. Kang! He was across the room in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. She felt so small, so fragile. Her body shook against his chest, and he could feel her heart hammering like a trapped bird. I've got you, he said quietly. You're safe. I knew you'd come. Her voice was muffled against his jacket. You're like a tiger. That's what Mrs. Chen says. Tigers always protect their cubs. Something cracked in his chest. He held her tighter, this little girl who trusted him absolutely, who believed he was a hero instead of the monster he'd always known himself to be. Close your eyes, he said. Don't open them until I tell you. He carried her through the warehouse, past the bodies and the blood, past the fire he'd already set spreading through the building's foundations. Diana kept her face buried in his shoulder, trusting him completely. Behind them, the warehouse began to burn. Christmas morning arrived, wrapped in soft snow and softer silence. Annabelle stood at her apartment window, watching flakes drift past the streetlights, when she heard it. The unmistakable sound of something large being dragged up the stairs. She opened the door to find Kang wrestling a 7-foot Douglas fir around the landing, pine needles scattered in his wake like a trail of breadcrumbs. His cheeks were flushed from cold and effort, his breath coming in white puffs. You already brought us a tree, she said. unable to stop the smile spreading across her face. That one was temporary. He maneuvered the tree through her doorway with surprising grace. This one stays. Diana appeared from her bedroom, still in pajamas, her eyes going wide. Mr. Kang, it's huge. Wait. He held up one finger, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something wrapped in newspaper. This is important. Annabelle watched as he carefully unwrapped a hand-carved wooden tiger, its features so delicate she could see individual whiskers, the proud curve of its spine, the fierce intelligence in its painted eyes. My grandfather made this, Kang said quietly, holding it out to Diana. For the top of our tree, when I was your age. It's traveled a long way to get here. Diana took it with reverent hands, her voice barely above a whisper. It's beautiful. Like you said, tigers are brave. He met Annabelle's eyes over her daughter's head. They protect what matters. The apartment filled with the scent of pine as they worked together to set up the tree, and Annabelle felt something shift in her chest. Not the familiar clench of fear, but its opposite. The sensation of walls coming down, of letting light into spaces that had been dark too long. 2 hours later, coffee cooled on the kitchen counter as FBI Special Agent Martinez laid out manila folders on Annabelle's dining table. The decorations on the tree beside them sparkled with an optimism that felt almost aggressive against the gravity of the conversation. We can offer full protection, Martinez said, her tone professional, but not unkind. Safe house, new identities if necessary. Mr. Kang's testimony will dismantle Yoon's entire organization, but I won't lie to you, the next few months will be difficult. Kang sat perfectly still, his hands flat on the table. How difficult? Court appearances, depositions, media attention probably. Yoon has resources and reach. Martinez looked at Annabelle. You and your daughter will be protected too, of course, but this isn't a decision to make lightly. Annabelle felt Diana's hand slip into hers under the table, small fingers squeezing tight. Her daughter had been so quiet through the whole discussion, absorbing everything with that unnerving perceptiveness children sometimes have. Can I ask something? Diana's voice cut through the adult conversation like a bell. Martinez nodded. Of course, sweetheart. Does this mean... Diana turned to look at Kang, her lower lip trembling slightly. Do you have to give Mom back now? Since you're not borrowing her anymore? The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through the room. Martinez had the grace to look away, shuffling papers. But Annabelle couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only watch as Kang's carefully controlled expression cracked open. He slid from his chair and knelt beside Diana, bringing himself to her eye level. What do you mean? You said you were borrowing her. On Thanksgiving. Remember? Tears spilled down Diana's cheeks now, unchecked. I thought maybe when all this FBI stuff was done, you'd have to return her, like a library book. Kang's hand came up to cradle her face, his thumb gentle against her cheek. Oh, little warrior. I said that because I was scared, because people had hurt me before. And I didn't know if I deserved, his voice caught. If I deserved to keep anything good. Annabelle felt her own tears coming, hot and sudden. She reached out, placing her hand on Kang's shoulder, and he looked up at her with such raw vulnerability that it stole what remained of her breath. You were never borrowing, Jae-sung. She took his scarred hand in both of hers, feeling the raised edges of old wounds, the strength beneath. You've been ours since the moment Diana saw you on that bench. Since she decided you needed us, and she was right. Tigers always find their way home. His fingers tightened around hers. Home, he repeated, testing the word like something foreign and precious. Home, Annabelle confirmed. 3 weeks later, with protection details arranged and court dates set, they returned to the park bench where it had all begun. Snow covered the seat now, unmarked and perfect, and Annabelle thought about all the versions of herself who had sat here before, alone, afraid, certain she would never be anything else. Kang brushed the snow away with gentle sweeps of his hand. Diana climbed between them without asking, tucking herself against her mother's side while reaching for Kang's hand. Not borrowing, Diana announced to no one in particular, her breath fogging the cold air. Not borrowing, Kang agreed, his voice rough with emotion he no longer tried to hide. Annabelle looked at them both, her daughter and this man who had stumbled into their lives carrying his own broken pieces, and felt the last of her old fears dissolve like snow in sunlight. They were no longer alone, no longer waiting. Finally, completely, impossibly chosen. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.